The night my wife told a room full of donors that another man deserved her more, she did not look ashamed, she looked relieved. That was the part one could not forget. Not the chandeliers, not the champagne, not the old brick hotel in downtown Charlotte with brass elevators and framed photographs of governors on the walls. It was the relief on Natalie Walker's face, like she had finally handed me a verdict she had been rehearsing in silence for months. My name is Ethan Walker, 44 years old, white, operations manager for a home repair company outside Charlotte, North Carolina. I know burst pipes, flooded basements, warped floors, roof leaks, bad wiring, and the kind of damage that looks small until you open the wall and see how far the rot has traveled. I arrived at the gala late because one of our crews had been stuck at a townhome complex after a water line failed. My jacket still had pale dust on the sleeves, and my hand smelled faintly of pine lumber even after I washed them in the hotel restroom. Natalie hated when I arrived looking like work. She never said it directly, but I could feel it in the way her smile tightened whenever I entered one of her polished rooms carrying evidence of the life that paid for them. She was 40, white, beautiful in a silver dress, her auburn hair swept over one shoulder, small diamond earrings catching the chandelier light every time she turned toward someone important. She worked as a fundraising specialist for a community arts organization, and that night was supposed to be her moment. Donors in dark suits and elegant dresses filled the ballroom. There were white tablecloths, gold-rimmed plates, tiny crab cakes, soft piano music, and auction cards printed on thick paper. I stood near the edge of the room holding a glass of water, watching my wife move through the crowd like she belonged to a version of Charlotte where nobody ever checked an invoice twice. Then I saw Caleb Price beside her. Caleb was 37, white, polished, and too smooth in the way men become when they learn charm can open doors faster than honesty. He called himself a communications consultant and patron strategist, which sounded expensive enough that people rarely asked what he actually did. He wore a tailored navy suit, no tie, and a calm expression that made every sentence feel personal. When Natalie laughed at something he whispered, I felt the small quiet crack that comes before the ceiling finally gives way. The host stepped to the microphone and praised Natalie for bringing fresh energy into the donor program. People clapped. Caleb placed one hand lightly at the back of her chair, not enough to make a scene, just enough to mark territory for anyone paying attention. The host joked that Natalie had been glowing lately and asked who deserved credit for that. A few people laughed. Natalie looked at Caleb first. Not at me. Not at the husband standing 15 feet away in a dusty jacket after 14 years of carrying the heavy parts of her dreams. She smiled, lifted her chin, and said, "Caleb deserves me more." The table went still. A fork touched a plate, then stopped. Someone near the auction display turned away too late. Caleb lowered his eyes with a practiced humility that almost looked respectful if you did not know it was performance. Natalie looked at me after the words landed, and I understood she was waiting for anger. Maybe she needed me to become rough, loud, small, anything that would make her sentence feel brave instead of cruel. I set my water glass down on the nearest cocktail table. Carefully. No splash. No sound except the soft click of glass meeting wood. Then I looked at my wife, the woman whose basement office I had built with my own hands, and realized she had not just embarrassed me. She had announced that the life I protected was something she believed another man had earned. For a few seconds after Natalie said it, nobody knew what to do with their hands. That is how I remember the room most clearly. Donors held champagne glasses halfway to their mouths. A woman by the silent auction table kept her fingers resting on a bid card without writing anything. Caleb stood beside my wife with one hand near the back of her chair, wearing the careful sadness of a man who wanted the room to believe he had not asked to be admired. I knew that expression. It was the face men make when they want the benefit of another man's loss without looking greedy enough to enjoy it. Natalie's eye stayed on me, sharp with warning and bright with fear. She had expected heat from me. Maybe she had even needed it. If I shouted, if I cursed, if I knocked over a chair, then the story would be simple for everyone in that ballroom. She would be the trapped woman who finally chose someone refined. Caleb would be the patient man who understood her value. I would be the dusty husband who proved her point. I decided right there that I would not hand them the ending they had rehearsed. I looked at the glass of water I had set on the cocktail table. A small circle of moisture had already formed under it, darkening the wood like a quiet stain. Then I stepped closer to Natalie, slow enough that no one moved away, calm enough that even Caleb's polished confidence seemed to tighten. I said, if he deserves you more, then he deserves all of you. Not just the chandelier version. Not just the woman in the silver dress with donors clapping. He deserves the overdue invoices, the missed deadlines, the storage fees, the panic at midnight, the calls when a fundraiser falls apart, and the mornings when being adored is not enough to pay for anything. Natalie's mouth parted slightly, and for the first time that night, she looked less certain that her sentence had been beautiful. Caleb gave a soft laugh and said, "Ethan, this is not the place." I turned my eyes to him. Men like Caleb always know the place for praise, but never the place for accountability. I said, "Then you should not have accepted the prize in public." The old hotel seemed to hold its breath. Piano music kept playing from the corner, too gentle for what had just happened. Natalie whispered that I was embarrassing her. I almost smiled, because a man can spend 14 years protecting a woman from embarrassment and still be blamed the first time he refuses to carry it for her. I took my keys from my pocket, nodded once to the host, and told Natalie I would not fight over someone who had already announced where she believed she belonged. Her face changed then. Not with regret. With surprise. She had wanted permission to leave, but not the cost of being released. I walked past the auction display, past framed paintings and flower arrangements, past people pretending to study their programs because looking at me would require them to admit they had witnessed a marriage crack open under a chandelier. At the ballroom doors, Natalie called my name. I stopped but did not turn all the way around. She said, "You are just going to walk out." I looked back at her, then at Caleb, then at the room that had applauded her 10 minutes earlier. I said, "I am giving you exactly what you asked for." Outside, cold Charlotte rain had started falling, soft but steady, turning the hotel lights into gold streaks on the sidewalk. I got into my truck and sat with both hands on the wheel while my jacket still smelled like pine lumber and wet concrete. Through the lobby windows, I could see Natalie standing under the chandelier with Caleb beside her, both of them suddenly smaller without my reaction to stand on. I started the engine and drove away, not because I did not love her, but because love was no longer a reason to keep paying for my own humiliation. The rain followed me home across Charlotte, tapping the windshield softly while the city blurred into red taillights and wet pavement. I drove past closed coffee shops, office towers with half their lights still on, and neighborhoods where porch lamps glowed like nothing could ever go wrong behind a front door. That is the strange insult of heartbreak. The world keeps looking normal while something inside you starts counting the years it wasted explaining pain away. Natalie and I had been married for 14 years. We started in a small rental house in Matthews with a sagging porch, uneven floors, and a kitchen sink that rattled every time the washing machine ran. Back then, she worked part-time for a community arts non-profit, answering emails, setting up folding chairs, and trying to convince wealthy people that local artists deserved more than polite applause. She had big dreams but no system behind them. I was running job sites for a home repair company, learning estimates, crew schedules, materials costs, and how to tell a homeowner the truth without making the truth sound cruel. Natalie used to say that was what she loved about me. I was steady. I did not panic when things broke. I fixed them. When she wanted a real home office, I spent 3 weekends turning our damp basement into one. I pulled old carpet, patched drywall, installed shelves, painted the walls a soft white she picked from a magazine, and built her a long desk from 2 butcher block slabs because the one she wanted cost more than our car payment. She cried when she saw it finished and called me her rock. I believed that word then. I thought being someone's rock meant they knew where to stand when life got uncertain. I did not understand that one day she would treat that same rock like something keeping her from floating away. Over the years, her work grew. So did the weight behind it. When a donor dinner needed backdrop panels, I built them in the garage after 10-hour days. When her organization needed chairs moved from a church basement to a gallery 3 miles away, I borrowed a company truck and did it before sunrise. When a spring fundraiser lost its vendor 2 days before the event, I drove across town in traffic to pick up linens, easels, extension cords, and a portable sound system while Natalie stood in the venue breathing into her hands, saying her career was over. I told her it was not over. I told her one bad night did not define her. Then I made the bad night disappear as best I could. That became my role. The man who made problems disappear before anyone important noticed them. Credit card balance after a failed donor campaign. Printing costs when the grant money came late. Storage fees for auction decor. A cracked windshield on her SUV the week of a board retreat. Every crisis came with tears, apology, promise, and a new start. Every rescue ended with me telling myself this was marriage. Teamwork. Loyalty. Love with work boots on. But after enough years, rescue can turn invisible. Natalie stopped seeing what I carried and started judging how I looked while carrying it. My practical questions became criticism. My budget concerns became lack of belief. My tired silence after long days became emotional distance. Caleb never had to meet those versions of her. He got the ballroom version, the silver dress version, the woman framed by chandeliers and donor compliments. I got the late invoices, the missed calls, the panic, the cleanup, the apologies that always expired before the next emergency. By the time I reached our driveway that night, the rain had slowed to a mist. The house was dark except for the basement window, where the office light Natalie had forgotten to turn off glowed against the wet grass. I sat in the truck and looked at that window for a long time. I remembered installing that light myself because she said overhead bulbs made her feel trapped. 14 years later, under another man's attention, she had decided I was the trap. I turned off the engine, and the silence settled around me like a receipt I finally had to read. I did not go inside right away because the basement light made the house look like a memory I was not ready to enter. Rain slid down the windshield, soft and steady, and I sat there thinking about Caleb Price, trying to remember the first time his name started showing up in our marriage like a guest who had forgotten to leave. Natalie met him at a donor strategy luncheon 6 months earlier, one of those private Charlotte gatherings where people use cloth napkins, speak softly about legacy, and treat money like a moral philosophy. She came home that afternoon brighter than I had seen her in months, carrying a folder of notes and a new phrase she repeated twice before dinner: emotional value. Caleb had told her that fundraising was not about asking for money. It was about helping powerful people feel remembered. That sounded harmless at first. Maybe even useful. I wanted her to succeed, so I listened while she described his ideas, his manners, his connections, the way he knew how to make wealthy donors feel seen without making them feel pressured. She said he understood the art world. She said he understood people. Later, she started saying he understood her. That was when the word harmless began to lose its shape. Caleb did not insult me directly. Men like him are too careful for that. He worked through contrast. He wore tailored suits and spoke about purpose while I came home with sawdust in my truck and invoices in my pocket. He sent Natalie articles about women who had outgrown small lives. He invited her to wine receptions where everyone talked about impact, legacy giving, and the beauty of being fully appreciated. He remembered tiny details, the artist she loved in college, the flowers she wanted at the next gala, the way she hated being called practical. He gave her the kind of attention that feels deep when you are hungry for it and feels rehearsed when you finally stop starving. I could feel the change at home. Natalie began correcting me before I finished sentences. If I asked whether the venue deposit had cleared, she said I was reducing her work to numbers. If I asked whether Caleb's consulting fee was approved by the board, she said I did not understand strategic relationships. If I came downstairs to her basement office with coffee, she kept typing as if accepting it would admit she still needed ordinary kindness. Caleb made her feel celebrated. I made sure the printer had ink before a grant packet was due. Caleb told her she deserved a bigger life. I checked whether the SUV had enough gas before she drove to Raleigh for a donor meeting. Caleb praised her vision. I asked if the auction budget included sales tax. In her mind, one of us was lifting her up and the other was holding her down. The cruel joke was that my hands were the only reason anything under her had not collapsed. By the time I finally walked into the house, the rain had darkened my jacket and the entryway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and cold air. I stood at the top of the basement stairs and looked down at the office I had built for her. The soft white walls. The long desk. The shelves filled with gala programs, framed thank you notes, donor packets, and little ceramic awards from events that almost failed before I helped save them. Her laptop was still open on the desk, glowing blue in the empty room. A brochure draft sat beside it with Caleb's name under communications consultant. His title was printed cleanly, professionally, like he had always belonged there. Mine was nowhere in that room except in the screws, the shelves, the paint, the repaired floor, and the invisible things nobody clapped for. That was when I understood what Caleb had really sold her. Not love. Not even happiness. He had sold her a version of herself that came without debt, without history, without the man in work boots who knew how much the spotlight cost after everyone went home. The laptop screen should have felt private, but nothing tied to my name, my money, and the house I helped keep standing was private from me anymore. Natalie had left her fundraising dashboard open, not because she was careless in a simple way, but because she had grown used to a life where I cleaned up behind her without looking too closely at what I was cleaning. I sat at the basement desk I had built from butcher block slabs and moved the mouse. The screen woke up to a spreadsheet of gala expenses, donor outreach, vendor payments, and consulting categories dressed in language soft enough to hide sharp edges. I started with Caleb's name. At first, the entries looked professional. Communications consulting. Donor cultivation. Brand strategy. Then the amount started telling a different story. $2,400 for a private dinner at a steakhouse near Uptown Charlotte. $1,800 for hotel rooms during a weekend donor retreat that Natalie had told me was covered by the organization. $900 for brochure design. $3,200 marked as strategic relationship development. Caleb Price Communications appeared again and again, like a stain someone kept moving under a rug. I opened the linked receipts and felt my body go still in that cold way men learn when anger would only blur the numbers. The private dinner had included Caleb, Natalie, 2 donors, and a wine charge large enough to pay a month of our utilities. The hotel room was under Caleb's name. The brochure had his consulting brand placed beside the arts organization logo, as if Natalie's work had quietly become his entrance fee. Then I found the office deposit. $5,000 paid toward a short-term lease for a small consulting suite in Uptown Charlotte, described in the memo line as donor development space. I opened the attachment. The lease listed Caleb Price as the primary occupant. Natalie Walker was listed as the guarantor. The payment had come from a joint account tied to a credit line I had agreed to years earlier when Natalie needed flexibility for fundraising events. I read the document twice, then a third time, because some betrayals are so plain they make your mind ask for a second witness. The man who supposedly deserved my wife more had not signed up for her life. He had signed up for an office, a donor pipeline, and somebody else standing behind the risk. I clicked through more emails. Natalie had forwarded Caleb a list of major donors, personal notes about their families, preferred charities, old connections, and who disliked being asked directly for money. I knew some of those names because I had parked cars at their events, carried auction items into their homes, and once fixed a loose handrail at a retired banker's house because Natalie was terrified he would cancel a pledge after tripping on the steps. Caleb had never carried a box for those people. He had never shown up before sunrise to set chairs or stayed after midnight to break down a backdrop. Yet there he was, stepping into the rooms I had helped Natalie build access to, dressed in clean language and polished shoes. I downloaded every receipt, every lease page, every invoice, and every email into a folder named Records. Not revenge. Records. A man in home repair learns not to argue with water damage. You photograph it, trace the leak, and stop pretending fresh paint fixed the wall. Around 1 a.m, Natalie came home. I heard the front door open, the pause in the hallway, then her heels on the basement stairs. She stopped when she saw me sitting at her desk. Her silver dress from the gala looked dim under the office light. I turned the laptop toward her and pointed to the lease. I asked why Caleb's office had my household credit behind it. She said I was misunderstanding the structure. That was when I knew she had no clean answer. I looked at the woman who had told a ballroom he deserved her more and said, then let him deserve the bill too. Natalie looked at the lease, then at me, and for 1 second I saw calculation move behind her eyes faster than guilt. She was trying to find the version of the truth that would make me sound unfair for noticing it. She said the guarantor language was temporary, that Caleb needed a professional space to meet donors, that his work helped the organization, and that I was reducing a strategic opportunity to a household argument. I sat in the chair I had built, under the shelves I had installed, in the basement office I had paid for with weekends and sore hands, and listened to my wife explain why another man's office was somehow part of our marriage budget. The old Ethan would have argued point by point. He would have tried to make her understand. He would have believed that if he could arrange the facts neatly enough, love would become reasonable again. I was done doing that. I turned the screen back toward myself, saved the lease, and opened the folder named Records. Natalie crossed her arms and said Caleb cared about the mission. I asked whether the mission included his hotel room. She said I was being cruel. That word had become a shelter for every uncomfortable fact she did not want to face. Before I could answer, my phone lit up on the desk with a message from Megan Harris, a financial assistant at the arts organization. I knew Megan only slightly. She was young, careful, always the first person at events with a clipboard and the last one checking vendor totals after everyone else went home. Her message began with an apology. People apologize like that when they are about to hand you something heavy. She wrote, "Ethan, I know this is not my place, but Caleb has been using Natalie's donor access in ways that do not feel right. I think you should see what was forwarded to me." Below it was a screenshot from a private conversation between Caleb and another consultant. Caleb had written, "Natalie is the easiest bridge to old money in Charlotte. She knows every widow with a foundation and every family that wants their name on a plaque. Her husband is too quiet to fight back, so I just need to keep her feeling appreciated until my own list is strong enough." I read it once, and the basement seemed to lose air. I read it again, slower, as if giving the words more time might make them less ugly. They did not change. Easiest bridge. Too quiet to fight back. Keep her feeling appreciated. There it was, the whole structure exposed. Caleb had not seen Natalie as a woman worth more. He had seen her as a hallway into rooms with checkbooks. I turned the phone toward her. At first she looked irritated, like she expected another receipt. Then her face emptied. She took the phone from my hand and held it close, her thumb hovering over the screen. I watched her read the sentence that turned praise into strategy. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Then she called Caleb. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sent a message asking what this meant. The little delivered notification appeared, then sat there like a locked door. I did not feel triumph. I wanted to, maybe, but the feeling would not come. Watching Natalie realize she had been used did not heal the part of me she had used first. It only made the room sadder. She whispered that Caleb must have been joking. I looked at the lease, the donor list, the office deposit, the hotel receipt, and the private message glowing on my phone. I said, "Jokes do not usually come with a $5,000 deposit." She sat down on the basement steps, still wearing the silver dress from the gala, no longer glowing under chandeliers, no longer framed by donors or Caleb's polished attention. Just a woman in a room her husband had built, holding proof that the man she said deserved her more had measured her by access. I saved Megan's message into Records, then backed up the folder to a flash drive. Natalie watched me like documentation was an act of violence. It was not. It was the first honest repair I had made for myself. I told her I would speak with a lawyer, an accountant, and the bank in the morning. I would not cover Caleb's office, Caleb's dinners, Caleb's travel, or Caleb's ambition. If he deserved her more, he could start by deserving the consequences. Outside, the rain kept falling over Charlotte, washing the windows clean while everything inside finally stopped pretending. By 6:40 the next morning, I was at the kitchen table with black coffee, a yellow legal pad, and the records folder open on my laptop. Natalie had slept on the living room couch, if she had slept at all. Her phone was still on the coffee table, face up, dark, waiting for a man who had called her valuable until value came with questions. I did not ask whether Caleb had answered. I had learned that silence can be an answer when a person has been using words as decoration. At 7:30, I called our bank and asked to speak with someone about the credit line tied to the joint account. The woman on the phone wanted to know if there had been fraud. I looked at the office lease, the donor dinner receipt, the hotel charge, the travel records, and Megan's screenshot. Fraud was too clean a word for what had happened. I said there were unauthorized obligations connected to a third party, and I needed restrictions placed on any new charges until documentation was reviewed. I did not drain the account. I did not block Natalie from legitimate household money. I did not try to destroy her work. I only stopped my name from being used as a ladder for Caleb Price. By 8:15, I called our accountant, Jerome Fields, a man who had handled our taxes for 6 years and never raised his voice about anything except missing receipts. I sent him the folder and asked him to separate actual household expenses, legitimate non-profit event reimbursements, and every charge tied to Caleb's consulting business. Jerome went quiet for a moment after opening the lease. Then he said, "Ethan, do not sign anything else, do not agree to anything verbally, and do not let guilt become a payment method." I wrote that down. At 10, I sat in a family attorney's office on East Boulevard, rain still clinging to my truck windows outside. Her name was Marissa Cole, and she had the calm, tired eyes of someone who had watched people mistake panic for strategy too many times. I handed her the printed lease, receipts, donor list emails, Megan's screenshot, and account statements. She asked if I had threatened Caleb, contacted donors, posted anything online, hidden money, or locked Natalie out of the house. I said no. She nodded and said that was good because the strongest position was usually the quietest one. Then she explained what I could protect, what I could not undo immediately, and what needed formal notice. Some obligations already signed might take time to challenge. New obligations could be blocked. Shared accounts could be limited. Evidence mattered. Tone mattered. Dates mattered. I listened like a man learning how to breathe differently. For 14 years, I had been fixing problems with my hands. This one required paper, patience, and the discipline not to rescue the person who had dragged me into the damage. By noon, Marissa had drafted notice to the office landlord stating that I did not consent to any additional guarantee, extension, renewal, or obligation under my name. By 1, Jerome had flagged 3 more Caleb charges hidden under donor cultivation, a car service, a private tasting, and a consulting retainer that had never been approved by the board. By 2, Natalie called me. I was sitting in my truck outside the attorney's office, watching rain slide down the windshield in thin crooked lines. Her voice was tight, frightened, angry. She said I was humiliating her. I said humiliation was what happened under the chandelier. This was accounting. She said I was making Caleb look bad. I looked at the folder on the passenger seat and said Caleb had done that with his own invoices. She went quiet, then said I used to protect her. That one found its mark. I closed my eyes for a second and saw the basement office, the backdrop panels, the folding chairs, the late nights, the silver dress, the sentence that split the room open. Then I said, I did protect you. I protected you so well you started thinking consequences were something only other people had to meet. I heard her breathe, but she did not answer. That evening, I came home with the first legal envelope tucked under my arm. Natalie was standing in the basement office, looking at the shelves I had built, the awards on the wall, the donor packets, the life she thought Caleb deserved more than I did. I placed the envelope on the desk and told her the bank had placed restrictions, the accountant was reviewing every charge, and the attorney would handle all communication about Caleb's office. She asked if this was what giving her what she asked for looked like. I looked at her, not cruelly, not softly, just clearly. I said, yes. You said he deserved you more. I am giving him the chance to deserve the whole truth, not just the part that sparkles under a chandelier. The emergency meeting took place the following Tuesday in a conference room at the Community Art Center, a narrow room with framed student paintings on the walls, a long table scarred by years of committee meetings, and rain tapping against the windows like it had followed us from the gala. Marissa Cole sat to my left with a legal pad and the calm expression of a woman who trusted documents more than emotions. Jerome Field sat beside her with printed account summaries clipped into color-coded sections. Across from us sat Natalie, pale and rigid in a navy blouse, her hands folded so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. 2 board representatives were there, along with Megan Harris, who looked like she wished the floor would open under her chair but still had the courage to stay. Caleb was supposed to attend. Natalie had told everyone he would clear this up. She said he cared about the mission, cared about her, cared about the organization. At 9:15, his chair was empty. At 9:20, Natalie texted him. At 9:30, Marissa began without him. The first document on the table was the consulting agreement. Caleb Price Communications. Donor strategy support. Monthly retainer. The second was the private dinner receipt. The third was the hotel charge. Then the travel invoice. Then the brochure draft with Caleb's brand positioned beside the arts organization name like he had bought his way into credibility using Natalie's signature. Natalie kept saying each item had context. Jerome answered with numbers. That is the thing about numbers. They do not become kinder because someone feels exposed. Then Marissa placed the office lease in the center of the table. Caleb as primary occupant. Natalie as guarantor. The joint credit line tied behind the deposit. One of the board representatives, an older man named Richard, removed his glasses and asked Natalie if the board had approved that obligation. She did not answer quickly enough. Megan looked down. The rain filled the silence. Natalie finally said Caleb had promised it would support donor outreach. I watched her say promised and realized how many disasters begin with that word. Marissa did not raise her voice. She simply slid Megan's screenshot across the table. Natalie saw it coming and closed her eyes before reading it, like a person bracing for a truth she already knew but had not yet named. Easiest bridge to old money in Charlotte. Too quiet to fight back. Keep her feeling appreciated. Richard read the lines out loud, not harshly, just clearly. Natalie's face changed with every word. Whatever defense she had carried into that room lost its spine. She reached for her phone and called Caleb. The room listened to it ring. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. Then a text came through, and for a second hope crossed her face so painfully that I had to look away. It was not from Caleb. It was from the office landlord, confirming that future access to the suite was suspended pending financial review. Jerome explained that donor list permissions had been locked until the organization completed an audit. Megan confirmed that Caleb had contacted at least 3 donor families without proper authorization. Natalie whispered that he would not just disappear. I did not answer. The empty chair already had. The board chair said Natalie would be placed on administrative review while the expenses were examined. No one shouted. No one needed to. The room was full of quiet consequences, and quiet consequences weigh more because there is nowhere dramatic to hide from them. Natalie looked at me then, and the accusation in her eyes had been replaced by something worse, recognition. She finally understood that Caleb had not wanted the late nights, the failed events, the anxious calls, the budget gaps, or the woman who needed real help after the chandelier lights went out. He had wanted the donor list, the office, the old money, and the protection of a husband he thought was too decent to defend himself. When the meeting ended, Natalie stayed seated while everyone else gathered folders and avoided her eyes. I stood, picked up the envelope Marissa had prepared, and felt no victory in my hands. Natalie said my name, very softly. I waited. She said, I thought he meant it. I looked at the empty chair where Caleb should have been, then back at the woman who had once called me her rock and later treated me like weight around her ankle. I said, maybe he did mean what he said. You just heard worship when he was describing access. Then I walked out into the rain, not because the story was over, but because I was finally no longer available to carry the parts of it she refused to hold. 3 months after the meeting, Charlotte had already started pretending the scandal was old news. That is what cities do. They keep building brunch spots, repaving streets, hosting charity luncheons, and hanging banners over theater doors as if lives do not come apart behind committee language and polite emails. Caleb was gone before the audit was finished. Someone said he had taken a consulting contract in Tampa. Someone else said he was advising a private foundation in Nashville under a slightly different business name. Men like Caleb do not disappear because they are ashamed. They disappear because the room stops giving them what they came for. Natalie was removed from the lead fundraising role and shifted into a temporary administrative position while the organization rebuilt donor trust. The office lease became a legal dispute. Some of the charges were reimbursed. Some became part of our separation negotiations. Marissa handled the paperwork. Jerome handled the numbers. I handled waking up every morning in a house that felt too quiet and reminding myself that quiet was not the same as failure. I moved into a small rental near Mint Hill, a plain place with a gravel driveway, a leaky gutter I fixed the first weekend, and a kitchen table I bought used from a retired couple who said it had survived 3 children and 2 moves. That seemed like a better history than most expensive furniture had. I kept working. Roof still leaked. Floor still warped. Pipes still burst when homeowners thought a warning sign was something they could deal with later. Work made sense because broken things were honest. They did not call you controlling for noticing damage. Late in April, I saw Natalie outside the community theater on a grey afternoon after a light rain. The same theater where I had once unloaded auction tables before sunrise and hung black curtains from a ladder while she directed volunteers with a headset and a smile that made everyone believe the night would work out. Now she stood beside the side entrance with 3 cardboard boxes at her feet, filled with binders, framed donor photos, thank you cards, and the little glass award she won the year the Arts Council praised her for bringing elegance back to local giving. She was wearing dark jeans, a beige coat, and flat shoes, her auburn hair pulled back without the careful shine I remembered from the gala. She looked older, not ruined, just real. I had come to pick up the last set of backdrop frames I had built years earlier, because the organization no longer needed them and someone remembered they belonged to me. Natalie watched me load them into the truck, then said my name. I stopped with one hand on the tailgate. She said Caleb only stayed while the doors stayed open. Her voice was not dramatic. It was tired in the way truth makes people tired after denial has done all the talking. I said, then he did not deserve you. He deserved access. She looked down at the boxes and nodded. After a while, she asked if I hated her. I thought about the chandelier, the water glass, the basement office, the donor dinners, the message that called her a bridge, and every night I had mistaken endurance for love. I told her no. Hate would have been another room I had to keep paying rent on. Her eyes filled, but I did not move closer. Compassion did not have to become rescue. She said she was sorry, and for the first time in years, the words sounded like they were not asking me to fix anything. I accepted them quietly. Then I told her that if a man deserved her more, he had to deserve the mornings without applause, the bills after the gala, the fear after the mistake, and the truth after the lights went out. Caleb had never wanted those. She closed her eyes like she understood too late. I wished her peace, lifted the tailgate, and got into my truck. As I drove away from the theater, Charlotte spread ahead of me under soft evening rain, traffic lights glowing red and gold on the wet street. I did not feel victorious. I felt lighter. For 14 years, I had tried to be the kind of husband who could carry anything. Now I understood that dignity begins when you stop carrying what someone else handed away.